So I want to say hello to everyone and welcome you to the first webinar in our series hosted by the Maryland Center for Construction Education and Innovation and the Kennedy Krieger Institute. This series is developed to help employers, supervisors, and industry partners better understand and support a neurodiverse workforce in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. When we talk about neurodiversity, we mean the wide spectrum of how people think, learn, and process information, including autism, ADHD, learning differences, and other cognitive variations. We chose this topic because the data makes something very clear. Neurodiversity is not rare. It is already present, often invisibly, in our workforce. A few important trends that I want to share with you all. Over the past 20 years, autism diagnoses have raised by roughly 300% in the United States. ADHD is widespread. 11.4% of children have been diagnosed, and 3 to 4.4% of adults currently have ADHD. Globally, about 3.5% of all workers live with ADHD. The workplace impact is real. Adults with ADHD lose an average of 21.6 days of effective productivity per year. They miss 13.6 days due to absenteeism and earn about 17% less than peers without ADHD. And that's because they don't have accommodations for themselves. In the construction industry specifically, studies from the UK show that 1 in 4 construction workers self-identify as neurodivergent. ADHD is the most common condition. Yet nearly 40% choose not to disclose because of fear of stigma or of being misunderstood. At the same time, those who do disclose, 80% of them report receiving helpful accommodations from employers. And across the broader labor market, job posting referencing neurodiversity, inclusive hiring have nearly tripled since 2018, showing a growing awareness and commitment. And a final point here before we get started is many young adults now entering the workforce have grown up with IEPs, 504 plans, and other school-based accommodations. They have experience with support systems, but the workplace is not always prepared to meet them where they are. So these trends tell us that building inclusive workplaces isn't optional. It's essential for attracting, supporting, and retaining talent. I'm Jen Deweese, president of MCCEI, and our mission is to make careers in the built environment more accessible, inclusive, and appealing to a diverse population. I'll be your moderator today, and we're joined today by an incredible panel. Stacy Beichler, oh, I forgot to ask you how to say your last name. Beekler? Yep.
Thank you,
Assistant,
Krieger. Yep.
Assistant Vice President of Neurodiversity and Community Workforce Development at Kennedy Krieger Institute. Tyler Shalhoub, a visually impaired individual on the autism spectrum with experience in public safety, emergency management, and community advocacy. And Olivia Danielson Veed, Senior Project Interior Designer at HOK, with deep expertise in inclusive design and workplace environments. Before we dive into our questions, Stacy, I'd like you to start with you. Kenny Krieger has partnered with MCCI to launch this series. Can you share why this partnership is so important and what you hope employers take away from these conversations?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. As Jennifer said, I am Stacy Beekler. People are still getting used to my
Yeah.
last name as well as myself sometimes. And I am the Assistant Vice President of Neurodiversity and Community Workforce Development at Kennedy Krieger Institute. We established this department just about 8 years ago, focusing on a multifaceted approach to improving employment outcomes for individuals with disabilities. Just to highlight what Jennifer said, it's also 1 in 4 adults identify as having a disability in the US. That is about 66 million individuals. So I like to say we are likely in a room with individuals who identify as having a disability. They may not disclose it and they may not share it, but it is everywhere. It is part of our community, is part of our society. And that is why it is so important that we are here together with Tyler, with Olivia, with Jennifer, because no matter what industry you are in, and no matter where you are in the community, we need to be focused and we need to prioritize putting supports and services in place so everyone can access their community and the workplace. It's key to remember that our community and our workplaces need to change, not individuals who identify as having a disability. And there are so many experts and resources and technology at our fingertips that we can make our workplaces more accessible and belonging for all.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Let's stay with you for a minute to help us frame this conversation a little further. So what barriers do individuals with disabilities face when entering in the work and then once they're in the workplace? And what strategies can businesses incorporate to promote acceptance of differences and build a more inclusive culture?
Yeah, Jennifer, that's a great question. And I think one of the things I do want to highlight when we think about barriers is sometimes that is barriers that are created by the social model. So that is what I was just discussing, the social model, which is our environment and people, right? It's created by society. And then there's also the medical model. So medical model is defined as an impairment that affects your day to day. And that is an impairment with anything. So I think it's really important when we think about barriers that at any point, any of us can have an impairment. It could be we break a leg. It could be that we are aging. It can be that we need glasses and contacts. And that is a very, very common practice that people wear glasses and contacts. However, it's not something that we need to seek an accommodation for in the workplace because it has become normalized. Currently, 80% of individuals identify as having a disability are currently not part of the workplace. That is 30 compared to 37% of individuals who do not identify as having a disability. And I think those statistics are staggering, and that 80% has not shifted very much in the last 15 years. So when we think about barriers, we're thinking about transportation. That could be use of public transportation. It could be the cost of using public transportation, not having a driver's license. Those of us, many of us are probably in Maryland. There isn't really a good paratransit system that goes cross county. We can think about work experience. Individuals who identify as having a disability who may have a more severe disability and graduate with a certificate of completion have had 3 years of work-based learning, so work experience while they stayed in school. But that is not always considered acceptable work as experience. So not having as much experience or not having a degree, a high school diploma, a certificate of completion, if you think about your job descriptions. We also want to think about communication. Communication can look different, and that can also be a barrier. We have to think about sensory, we have to think about lighting, fragrance, and skill. Skill is so important for the workplace. And I think when we're trying to break down these barriers, we need to focus on skill. Often in the interview process, we're asking lots of questions, right? Who, tell me a time, a lot of recollection, a lot of examples. Well, let's focus on the skill. Let's match talent to what we have available and need at our organization. Can we provide supports for transportation? And we think about how we communicate and having captioning in all of our meetings and thinking about verbal and written feedback to somebody's. There is a lot of different examples I can go into about barriers and a lot of different examples that I can go into when it comes to how do we break down those barriers. But what's key is that it starts at the top in your organization. It starts with your managers. It starts with your CEOs, your COOs. If this is a priority in your organization, anything is possible when we can think about making modifications in the workplace so everyone can access it. There's lots of barriers. There's lots of barriers for a lot of us, right? But we find ways to support ourselves and put in different accommodations. Sometimes we need supports and mentors to help identify those needs so all can access work.
So let's dive a little bit into that comment you mentioned, it starts at the top. So how do you ensure that inclusivity isn't just reactive, but it's embedded in your culture and decision making from the start?
Yeah, I think it can start with something very, very simple as the ability to have dim lighting in your building. Super simple in your space. It can be as simple as captions at every meeting. Using AI now to take notes. So these simple yet they might not seem as simple, but they really are simple to put in practice so that maybe someone who needs notes and needs to go back to that meeting notes has access to it. You want to think about self-disclosure. Can go either way. Some people are comfortable with self-disclosure and some people do not want to disclose. And I know that Jennifer already mentioned reasons behind why people may not want to disclose. However, if you create a culture of support and that disclosing provides you opportunities to get accommodations in the workplace, that's also going to make a change within your culture. We also want to accept everyone for who they are and not call people out or identify an individual as someone that we know might identify as having a disability as causing challenges or asking too much. We want to be able to provide that support. And if you think about the term neurodiversity, right? Let's simplify it. Neuro, brain, diversity, differences. Differences of the brain. Every single one of us on this call has a difference of the brain. We do things differently. We put different strategies in place. The goal has to be what can we put in place so everyone has access? And the most important question you can ask is, what can I do to support you? How can I support you? Ask the person, ask your employee, what do you need? And then work together to navigate that to put the supports in place. And that in itself creates a culture of safety and support where everyone feels valued for what they have to offer the organization. And it doesn't matter how it gets done, it's done in a way that is valued.
Thank you, Stacey. That really paints a clear picture of the systems and structures that shape people's experiences. So let's now bring in that employee perspective that you were just mentioning. Tyler, you've had a range of experiences as a student, intern, and employee. Your voice is so important in grounding this conversation. So, can you share a time when a workplace felt truly inclusive to you and what made the difference?
Yes, absolutely. I would say I've had a handful of experiences. One that really sticks out for me was, well, I kind of have two employment experience that I'll share. One is at Kennedy Krieger Institute itself, where I worked as a COVID-19 health screener back in 2021 to 2022, and I feel like I feel like the environment was inclusive because I felt like like people just understood like what I needed. Like I felt like people would kind of like empathize. Like and it was a culture of compassion, like empathy, and I feel like and I feel like that really made a difference because it made me feel like psychologically safe to where I could say like this is what's going on, this is what I need accommodation or support with, and like vice versa. And then other examples would be like I don't like say if you need help like finally getting to your paycheck or like helping like access public transportation. To me those in the beginning those were kind of like barriers that I had to overcome because like and Jennifer, like you mentioned at the beginning of the call, some people don't have a driver's license, some of them don't have reliable transportation, so that was a barrier. And what really made the difference in that situation is when Kennedy Krieger, when they created like a Lyft account like for me to be able to use in the event that my other taxi services like Taxi Access or paratransit either were not running that day or either they were having like unexpected delays that would make like getting home kind of difficult. And so I feel like there it was really it was very inclusive. And then I also worked for the Anne Arundel County offices of emergency management and risk management, and in my opinion, I found those environments inclusive because like for one thing, there were like a few staff members who already had some experience or some knowledge already in how to work with neurodiverse and PIA and other like groups with disabilities. Like in the Office of Emergency Management, there was one employee who previously worked at a hospital, so knew how to work and like how to work and explain projects and tasks to me. So I felt like that made a difference because if you have somebody like who knows what it's like, somebody who already has experience and expertise in what it's like for a neurodiverse individual to work and need accommodations and support. I feel like that can really make a difference because like the neurodiverse person needs to understand, they want to feel assured that like their needs, like their opinions are being understood, and they know like, and that the employers and whoever's in charge understand what they're talking about. And then same for my risk management position. I also felt like everybody was quite inclusive there because even though they may have not had the experience with working with neurodiverse individuals, I felt very psychologically safe and comfortable being able to disclose my disability status. And I felt like once I did that and explained what I would need and the kind of help I would need, I feel like it just made me feel like included, like in the work environment. I felt like I belonged. I felt safe to speak up if something was wrong. Like so the bottom line is I feel like one of the barriers that needs to be broken down just from my experience alone is just creating that culture of like psychological safety where people are like free to like in a professional manner like speak and say like this is what's going on, this is what I need. Like I think what the problem could be for a lot of neurodiverse individuals is if they're in a working environment where that psychological safety is not prioritized, like Jennifer said, that can create like stigma or fear or like other like negative perceptions that may inadvertently make them less comfortable to self-disclosure or the need for accommodations. So I feel like, and so based on the experience I just mentioned with you, I would say that just building that culture of psychological safety and comfort, and then just like a level of trust and integrity, like it really comes a long way, especially for the neurodiverse community.
That's really great, Tyler. It sounds like because you felt psychologically safe, you were able to advocate for yourself. So are there any specific examples of times that you had to advocate for needs that you weren't getting, and what was that experience like for you? Or maybe a time that
Yes,
you didn't feel safe?
I would say, to be honest, I would say like, I really haven't run into experience where it didn't feel safe, but I will say like there were times where I needed to request accommodations. Like there was this one project I worked at my risk internship with the Anne Arundel County Office of Risk Management, where there was a project that required a lot of like moving between two or three different like apps or tasks at once. And for someone with a visual impairment and autism, it can be kind of difficult to have to like move back and forth between two or three like tasks or applications at once. So one of the accommodations I was able to get is number one, like kind of having like a simple like kind of calendar or schedule of what to expect. But second, like being able to find projects where it's easier to move and to work in like small things like using only one app or one piece of software at a time, like but basically trying to find it to where like instead of having to move between apps and software like to get things done, like I felt like I was able to they were my employers and I we were able to find solutions that made it more easier for me to work. And I feel like as I mentioned before that like that psychological safety really helped. I would say disclosing a disability, I mean, like you mentioned at the beginning, I wouldn't say I feel psychologically unsafe or uncomfortable, but it is something that I feel like I kind of do weigh on, and I think one of the barriers I face is like right now as I'm in my job search, I'm often kind of in that debate where I have to decide whether I want to like disclose, and it's not so much that I don't feel comfortable or psychologically unsafe, but it's just I don't know like I don't know the culture of the workplace until I get there like to like the interview stage. So I'd rather be safe than sorry, and not like I don't want to create any stigma or anything. So to answer your question, I feel like my experience with feeling safe to disclose my need for accommodations and support, I feel like it's gone pretty well. I haven't really needed like needed extra space whenever I didn't feel uncomfortable, but I did think that would be a good way to to address that second part of your question.
Thank you. So while you've been on your job search, have you opted out of any opportunities because it didn't feel inclusive? And if so, what would have changed that for you?
Yes, I would say there's a few positions related to there were a few positions that I was really interested in, such as some mid-level occupational safety roles, and one of the two barriers in terms of safety, one of the a few of the barriers I face and is some of the how do I how do I figure out how much of the qualifications do I need to meet? Let's say I don't have the exact number of years of experience they're looking for, or they're asking for a bachelor's degree when I only have a high school diploma and a 2-year degree. And to me that and alone is a barrier itself, because many neurodiverse individuals, I wouldn't say the word many, but there are some groups of neurodiverse individuals who may have struggles affording the cost of attending a 4-year college. And to me that has kind of held me back, because I kind of fear like if I it's kind of, and the fear kind of goes both ways. It's I could get the degree, but I'm afraid what if I don't use it? But the other thing is, but if I choose to save money, by not getting my 4-year degree, am I limiting myself? And I feel like that's kind of a barrier that neurodiverse individuals face when it comes to qualifications. And then certain things some positions might require a driver's license, and while it may be job necessary and consistent with business necessity, as stated in the Americans with Disabilities Act, while some of those requirements may make legitimate sense, I do feel like it can create an atmosphere for job applicants with disabilities who don't know if they would otherwise qualify for the job if they can't meet not all of the standards. I feel like there's kind of a fear or a perception of risk aversion in the hiring process, where some neurodiverse individuals, including myself, don't know how do I know if it's worth applying? How will I know if employers if they're satisfied with what I do have, my resume, cover letter, my education and experience? I feel like because we live in and there, because there are some places that have a lot of risk aversion, where they just want to be very particular. They want to find the right fit, which in itself, which is it's a valid point. People want to find the best candidates, but at the same time, I feel like it requires a little bit of growing and potential. It requires stepping out of what you would normally want. In other words, just because somebody may not meet all the qualifications you're truly looking for doesn't necessarily mean that they're not capable of doing the job. And I feel like that's one part of the job search process that I feel like employers can do a little bit better of capturing, is saying this is what is essential, this is what we need you to have, and if you need a reasonable accommodation, so we'd be happy to help you through that. But if you can say this is what we really need. And other examples of the job search process which held me back, other requirements include some jobs, some supervisor roles, or some human resource roles or onboarding roles. They may I feel like some of those job descriptions might could be as simple cut and paste jobs, because some of them mention things like the ability to climb or the ability to lift X amount of pounds. And even though that's not a problem for me, that can still inadvertently deter other candidates with disabilities from applying if they don't meet all of those requirements. So I feel like, so I'm not saying that we need to reevaluate the requirements, but we just need to be able to prioritize this is what candidates absolutely need, and absolutely need. And I feel like if there's a better clear distinction of what's really needed and what's not, I feel like that can really help applicants, including myself, in the job search process.
Can
I'm
I
very
add on to that, Jennifer, really
sure.
quickly? I think, Tyler, one, your point about risk aversion was a very, very good point. I appreciate you sharing that. I think that is something that's not often discussed in these conversations. And I think that comment and what you shared goes a long way. And I also want to comment about the job descriptions. I think job descriptions can be a huge barrier. And where Tyler is talking about lift restrictions or all like physical needs, and maybe all like that's just like standard on your job description template that isn't actually for that job, it's really important to take a look at those job descriptions. Look at them, make changes. Think about GED versus high school diploma versus including certificate of completion, all of which are ways to graduate from school. I will say at Kennedy Krieger Institute, we actually did do that. We did take a deep dive into job descriptions. We made changes when it came to those hiring requirements that were standard across most of our job descriptions. We also, in my department, the Neurodiversity at Work department, we made changes to qualifications to include certificate of completion. So if you have that opportunity, take a look through your job descriptions or reach out to organizations like me at Kennedy Krieger who can help you. We have helped organizations look at those job descriptions and make changes to accommodate hiring individuals of all abilities and thinking about how can we make work more accessible for all.
I wanted to mention too, like you're right. I know that a lot of companies, the state of Maryland, for example, I think Turner Construction, they have all dropped the need for a college diploma, which I think is important. Work experience and life experience. You're right. So many people in the hiring have just been on like they make rote decisions. They've just been doing it the same way and in an industry and in a world in which we have such a huge workforce shortage, we need to think outside the box when we are looking at the people that are best fit for the job, because it often doesn't look like the person that has been in that seat for the last 40 years. It is a new, different type of person. So
Mhm.
thank you so much, Tyler. That perspective it was very invaluable. So let's see. Stacy, back to you. So what are some of those best practices for recruiting, onboarding, and retaining neurodiverse employees? Like you were just
Yeah, yeah.
speaking
I
there.
think I'll be very brief because I think I touched on it a bit when we are thinking about how to bring in talent into our organizations. And when we are thinking about hiring and recruiting, right? Let's think about the interview process. How can we adapt and change that process? Let's focus on skill base. Let's focus on during the application process, is there someone to contact, creating comfort of making sure that if someone would like to disclose in advance and have that conversation, we're matching talent to opportunities within our workforce. That's something we do at Kennedy Krieger Institute. We have a human resources hiring pathways program where individuals can self-disclose in advance and are supported in finding employment within our organization. And then on top of that, we have our Neurodiversity at Work department, which is a resource to provide on the job supports if needed, if that individual requires or requests that. So that is when you're thinking about the interview and hiring process, maybe you can change it up. We do walk and talk interviews. Interviews are hugely anxiety driven, right? Those of you who have done interviews, right, who are on this call and think back to those interviews and how nervous you got. You want to make sure you answer every question correctly. Well, take out the stress of the eye contact. I can't tell you how many times we have done mock interviews and feedback comes back to say there wasn't enough eye contact. Is eye contact going to tell you if the person is capable of doing the job? Absolutely not. So let's think about what we've normalized that we look for in interviews and focus on what can be different. Walk and talks take the stress out. It's having a conversation. To this day, no matter who I'm hiring, I just have a conversation and I say it up front. Let's have a conversation. This isn't just for individuals with disabilities. This is for all. And when we're thinking about management and retention, I will say again, ask your employee, what do you need? We all, those of you who are managers on this call, because I am sure there are managers, think to yourself, do I manage every single person the exact same way on my team? If your answer is no, that's what it should be. Every single person is different. Every single person needs something different. As a manager, I know my job is to lead my team and be available for problem solving, to answer questions, to mentor, to guide on projects. It is no different if a person on my team identifies as having a disability or not. I need to manage that person, but how it's going to make that person the most successful in their job and move the department along. And then when we are thinking about retention, retention can look differently for everyone, right? And organizations, all of our organizations are at different places and needs and supports and culture and morale. But when we are thinking about retaining our employees and all employees, we need to think about workplace happiness, right? How do we enjoy coming to work every single day? And how and why do we enjoy coming to work? That is no different for anybody, a person with a disability or without a disability. And if we can find that balance of talent and skill and workplace happiness, you're creating that perfect culture of accessibility in the workplace for all.
Thanks so much, Stacey. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I know, Olivia, you have some visuals for us to help us. So, as a designer at HOK, you work on making sure that you design spaces that influence how people feel, work, and collaborate, and explore inclusivity from a built environment perspective. Can you share the difference between accommodations and creating an inclusive environment and how that shows up in your work?
Absolutely. So accommodations are really typically like a one-time investment. And that could be anything like a keyboard with larger keys and larger font. It could be like providing closed captioning in meetings, like Stacy and Tyler were mentioning. Anything like that, but it's, very low cost barrier typically. But the thing that I struggle with those is that the onus is on the employee to advocate for themselves. And as Stacy mentioned, sometimes you don't know what A is available or what you can advocate for or feel comfortable advocating for that and not feeling like you're asking too much, right? So when we talk about accessibility or inclusive design, that's really the company, and again, that top-down message of the company sending a cultural message to you as the employee saying, we want you to bring your whole self to the office, and your well-being is very important to us. And it's not seen as a difference, but as an asset to the team, right? And a way that, I feel like I've done my job is if there are not a lot of accommodations needed, right? And of course, there are going to be some, and those aren't going away, but we want to minimize those because that's minimizing the barriers. We also know that disability can be invisible. About 70% of disabilities are invisible. So, and actually, something that I heard this stated really interestingly the other day, and it's that I am temporarily abled instead of that I'm temporarily disabled. Because that's actually, when you think about it, I was like, wow, that really actually resonates because we could at any time have a temporary disability or find out we have a permanent disability. So really, there's more people that have that as their reality than people that are 100% able in every single aspect of their life, which is honestly rare. So when we have the built environment misaligned with an impairment, that is where the disadvantage occurs. And so as designers, we have a very large responsibility to create that alignment so that people can engage in a space to their best ability. They can move through it without being, triggered or disabled, and that's just incredibly important.
So on that line, like what does universal design mean to you as a leader, and how do you apply it to support inclusivity?
Yeah, um, so universal design and inclusivity, both of those we take very seriously, especially at HOK. We recently wrote a book on the topic of creating and designing neuro-inclusive workspaces. So it's definitely in our ethos. We implement it into all of our markets, whether it be workplace or public spaces like airports, sports arenas. Actually, I've loved what we're doing with sports arenas lately. because they also double as, just any live entertainment, right? Because they host a lot of concerts, etc. And we're designing so many sensory rooms in these now. And I'm doing one for Levi Stadium, which is where the 49ers play. And the Super Bowl's hosted there this year. So we've been designing one with them since over the summer. And actually, they're hosting not only the Super Bowl this year, but they're also hosting the World Cup. And FIFA has it in their contract for the World Cup that you have to have a sensory space to be able to host the World Cup. So we were actually designing the space for the timeline of the World Cup, and the NFL said, "Oh, hey, wait a second, we want this online before the Super Bowl." And I think that's great. The Eagles Stadium in Philadelphia, they also had a sensory room. So I think just like being inclusive in the environment, no matter if it is workplace or at an airport, which we are doing a lot of sensory spaces in airports because, again, very anxiety inducing space, like you're nervous about the travel, like you need some place to kind of decompress sometimes. So being able to inject those into just real world scenarios and where they make the most sense for the function.
And finally, how do you approach that inclusive planning when designing workplaces or events?
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen here for a second. Get this. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay, so get this back up here. Oops. So with HOK, again, designing our inclusive spaces is super important to us. So we kind of approach it in different ways. We want to understand the senses and what does that mean? So we are bombarded by sensory input at every millisecond of the day. It is actually insane with the increased technology usage, more inclusive, like environmentally immersive spaces. Sometimes that's great and interesting, but also for sometimes that's debilitating for people. So being understanding of the environment that you're creating and those senses. So we have the five senses on the top line here, which we learned in school, right? Auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory, gestation. But there's also three other senses that are really important, especially in the built environment. And that's interoceptive. So that's how you feel within your own body. And that could be you're overheated and you're not able to focus on the task at hand, right? If there's anyone in facilities, they're like, yes, that makes sense because I get requests all the time for it's too hot in here, it's too cold in here. That is because of the interoceptive senses, right? You also have proprioceptive, which is how your body feels in space in relation to another object, wall, person. You can think of that on maybe being on a crowded train and feeling really uncomfortable. And that can also change because for myself, before COVID, I would just pack myself on a train, wouldn't care, during my commute, but we kind of went home desensitized a little bit. And now being on a packed train really bothers me, right? So that can be situational. And then vestibular. So this deals with your balance and coordination, and something to think about with this, especially with an aging population too. If you use high contrast flooring, for example, somebody who has vestibular issues, they could view that high contrast as a hole in the floor. And then when they're trying to avoid it, it throws their balance off and they can fall. So it's a safety issue as well. And then understanding how these kind of lie on the sensory threshold. We have people who are hypersensitive who need less of these sensory inputs and stimuli, and we have hyposensitive, so people who need more of it. And then we have people who are neurotypical in the middle. And I will argue there is probably not any neurotypical people, maybe very few neurotypical people, because even per stimuli, you can be hypersensitive for one set of stimuli, you can be hyposensitive for another. So it's not a monolith whatsoever. And that's why we have to really keep in mind this sensory threshold and thinking about, okay, we need to have areas within the space that have more simple patterns, lighter neutral colors, think places that are clean and orderly, something that's predictable. And then in other areas, that's where you inject some of these layering textures and planes and having saturation of color, visual interest, and kind of heightening that unexpected element. And those need to dovetail into the same area. And thinking even of like a cafe area, for example, having spaces where which tends to be very like overstimulating sometimes, right? More on the hyposensitive sector of this threshold. But having places that people who are hypersensitive can still engage in that same environment and still feel safe. Things like this would be like a banquette so that they can sit on the softer side, the banquette portion of it, their back is protected, they can look out. Maybe it's bringing down a soffit over that area. Same thing with booths, just kind of creating a more intimate feeling. And then, and then we go into some top design strategies. And again, these are for if you're hyposensitive or hypersensitive, depending on the stimuli, right? So this is kind of the top strategies for people who were sensory seeking or not sensory seeking. They still overlapped with the needs for these 13 design strategies. They were just in a different order of priority for these folks. So regardless of what end of the spectrum you're on, people need place to move and fidget. And I think that is such a misnomer because we so often say, okay, well, you can go sit in a focus room. Okay, so that's not going to help me, right? I'm then put in a dark enclosed room and still in a seated posture that doesn't allow me to move around. Like these focus rooms are getting smaller and smaller, right? Or if it's like a focus pod, like those are even worse, honestly. But that works for somebody, but it's not the solution, right? So separating people out of the main environment is not the solution. We need access to daylight. And we need work points on low traffic areas. So it's really understanding how we're spatially sequencing these spaces. Dedicated quiet rooms. Again, the goal of acoustics is not to remove all audio input, right? Because if you're in a space where you can hear a pin drop, that's also really disconcerting and like uncomfortable, right? So it's really understanding the soundscape of where that's appropriate and where it's not appropriate. And bringing in different elements through, biophilia, that's super important, reducing visual clutter, and just kind of visual connections and clear sight lines make people comfortable knowing what's ahead, right? There's no surprises on that. And also different lighting levels. The three most impactful senses or stimuli is going to be noise, lighting, and then again, what we talked about with temperature. And then continuing on with that, we have color and design. This isn't unfamiliar to people, but it's just, I want to just reiterate the importance of color and natural elements into the space and what that affords you. You want to be very cognizant when you're using energizing colors or where you're using calming colors. There's a place for each of those, and it's just getting it in the right element. And also using those for wayfinding is super helpful. We call it intuitive wayfinding. So you need to be able to guide someone through a space without using signage. People can't always read the signs. People might speak a different language. They may not be able to read in the same way you do. And so using architectural elements to pull you through the space. We also know that people who are neurodivergent tend to avoid eye contact and look at the ground more. So one of your biggest canvases is the floor and how you can help direct people through a space by not even having to look up, right? And then finally, some biophilic elements. It doesn't always mean a plant in the corner. It could be more interesting than that. So even just taking like the feeling of water and interpreting it into a texture. Not everyone can have, a green wall, but even if you interject water into a space or use the sound of water, that's also really impactful. So if you also look at this, there's the built environment, and that's something that, designers are responsible for in conjunction with partnering with our clients. But there's also operations and HR policies, a lot of these things that Tyler and Stacy were talking about, and also some personal adjustments that we need to be aware of. Not everything's going to be perfect. There are going to be some accommodations we need to consider, or just like giving yourself and or your employees time to get used to something and help being curious about what their feedback is in the process loop, to get some of these things right. And then if you listen to nothing I say today, if you remember options and variety, choice and control, and if you can start injecting that into your designs, into your workplaces, that's going to get you so far, because having one without the other leads to some of those misalignments.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That was really
Mhm.
fascinating, and I could probably listen to you talk about design and how the built environment affects our sensitivities all day. So I wanted to thank Stacey, Tyler, and Olivia for your honesty, your leadership, and your insight. I know we ran a little over, so thanks for those of you that are still sticking with us. And I wanted to thank everyone, who joined us for this important discussion. This is just the first in our series. Our next one will be January 13th. It's Becoming Agents for Access. We'll be diving deeper into real employer case studies as well, training strategies, onboarding practices, and the nuances of building inclusive culture. So we encourage you to stay connected with MCCI and Kenny Krieger for more tools, resources, and upcoming sessions, because together we can build workplaces that are more inclusive, more innovative, and stronger because of neurodiversity. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.